Thank you for joining us on Downstairs and Dragons, where we play D&D in our basement as per tradition. This is another recap for Hisugi's Heroes. We're going to go into episodes 16 through 26. That seems like a lot, but it's mostly roleplay, so we can sum it up pretty quickly. We know already. Fought off the Avaleth invasion, figured out why the Swahagin attacked, dealt with a trial of a merfolk that was quite important, and now we need to find the Sea Elves. So let's talk about that. It takes our characters, let's jump back. I'm going to do a little recap of the characters, actually. So we have Takoyaki, our Cicalia. We have Jonex, is our water sprite. We have Orwell, is our Sina Sarkid, custom race. We have Yisk, the Lokata. And we have Karos, the Triton. So let's go over that again. Takoyaki is a bard. Jonex is a warlock. Orwell is a wizard. Oh, I never said that, but he's been sleeping and laying around the whole time anyway, so we don't really know that yet. Yisk is a blood hunter who worships Hisugi. That's important. And Karos is our monk. So they are headed north to find the Sea Elves. They've already been a few days north where they caught a marrow and had to go back. So now they're backtracking again. It takes them 7 days to get to the Sea Elves. But right before they get to the Sea Elves, they find something you should take note of. They found this big, beautiful branching coral. You could look that up online. They're really pretty. Big red branching coral. And when I say big, I mean like 10 feet tall, 15 feet tall, depending on which one you're looking at. This coral doesn't move. It's very stiff. But it gives off this mucus or the slime. They notice that the slime has the ability to turn living creatures into, I would say zombies, but they don't quite necessarily die. I mean, they do die. So it's kind of like necromancy, but it only works on living creatures. So living creatures are turned, they do the coral's bidding, and they attack anyone the coral wants them to attack. Kind of think about how a dryad will convince someone to protect her tree. But the coral itself doesn't have a person who comes out and talks. The coral doesn't talk, doesn't move. It just has the slime that has this ability to do this to others. Now, because it doesn't move, our characters are able to swim right over it, out of its reach, and they're fine. The thing is, they just entered the Sea Elf territory. It turns out the Sea Elf territory is completely encompassed, completely surrounded by these red corals, each like a slightly small space between each of them. So we're in the Sea Elf territory. What we find in the territory isn't like a war camp, isn't like a giant city. We find a shanty town. It's a bunch of houses built out of rubble and rocks and seaweed and driftwood. What is interesting is they're in the middle of this crater on the shallow ocean floor. The crater is filled with beautiful white sands, and the edge walls of the crater are made of a beautiful white stone that's been carved with the images of lore. So it's very different to see these beautiful images and these kind of rickety houses, especially because there's so many Sea Elves staying here. It's quite a big settlement. It's quite a big village. So our characters show up and hide on the outside of the crater, and they can see there are Sea Elves floatingly floating around their village, just taking care of their daily chores. Really just chill people wearing pretty poor woven clothing. Let's see. But there are a couple with armor. So our characters decide to disguise themselves. They decide to use seeming to appear to look like Sea Elves, to blend in with the Sea Elves. Except for Jonex, because Jonex is this big, and so the biggest he can appear is like a Sea Elf child. They go in and they talk to the armored warriors pretending to be Sea Elves, and what they find out is actually why the Sea Elves trespass in Halit. It seems innocent enough. What they do is they go and visit the Swahagin to learn about coming storms. And they'll explain how that works. Swahagin tend to have a village calendar called the TULE. It's an artifact. It's very important, very protected, and their priestess reads it. Now, this calendar can predict things when you study. Well, it's not that it predicts things. You can predict things when you study it. Kind of think like a Mayan calendar is a good influence for it. But the Sea Elves go and listen to the Swahagin and see if there's any big major storms coming up. They tend to do this every 50 years, and it tends to be right around the time a storm is due. So we are expecting a storm pretty soon here, and that's important for the characters to remember as they go and swim out in the ocean away from home. But that really doesn't seem that bad. These sea elves are just trying to see when there are storms to protect themselves, but it is trespassing. It did harm the Swahagin, and our characters still don't like that the sea elves did it. Sensing the stress on the sea elf faces that they're pretending to have, they're invited to stay for a prayer with the leader. We need to backtrack a little bit. There's something I didn't say in the last recap because I want to save it for describing right here. Do you remember the tainted merfolk, the merfolk that turned into a marrow? And I said that it turned into a marrow because of evil influences. Well, that evil influence was the merfolk started sacrificing to Umberlee. Feel free to look up more on her, on Umberlee, but I can say right now that Umberlee is a very old goddess of the sea and the storm. Her followers are usually evil, as you can tell by the sacrifices. And the sacrifices made to appease her, sea elves make a very good victim for that ritual. So, this is the marrow that was talking to sea elves, learned about Umberlee, and then started worshipping her. So why are these sea elves worshipping a goddess who loves when sea elves are sacrificed to her? That's strange, right? These sea elves don't worship her as the bitch queen as most people know her. They're worshipping her as Panzuriel, the younger, less evil being she used to be. You can look back at her history and find out that she really wasn't as wrathful as she is now. So the Marrow didn't like that blasphemy, and they thought this incorrect worship was not the right way to go to appease her, and the merfolk switched over to doing, the more modern worship, and that's what turned them into Marrow. So back to the sea elves. They invite the characters to join in a village gathering that night. And this explains why the sea elves would believe and worship Umberlee. It's because their leader does. Their leader walks out into the pavilion to lead everyone in a sermon and a prayer. He is a human. They call him Audacor, which means father, but his name is Acacius, and I will call him that for the rest of the story. Acacius is a human, underwater in the ocean, walking, breathing, talking, as if everything's normal, which is alarming to our characters. They're like, well, how is he doing this? I'm very excited that we get to go into that in the epilogues. So he looks to be an old man, in pretty good shape under his old coat, and his eyes are kind, his smile is sweet, as he shares a prayer and a story about Umberlee. If you have the chance, the story is explained in greater detail in the episodes, or if you want to go look for the information online. But there is a story about how Umberlee became her very evil self. It's a story of how her heart was broken and her rage ignited by a shark man named Lakavas. He pretended to fall in love with a girl in his harem in order to anger Umberlee. And that it did. She killed the girl and ripped out Lakavas's eye before he could flee from his love's wrath. And now this human cleric has been trying to calm Umberlee back into her old self. I don't know how someone would expect to calm a god, but he and his followers dedicate themselves to Panzuriel, her former self, and his followers dedicate themselves to him because he rescued them. He rescued them from living in a slave farm for a Kraken. Do you remember the Kraken we mentioned was being worshipped in Hali? Yeah, there is one. It's relatively far away. That's why Hali isn't really aware of it. It's about a month east. And the other thing is, the Bronze Dragon flew east. So this might be a chance for the players to kind of check out two things to the east. Kill two birds with one stone. Of course, the smart thing to do would be to avoid the Kraken. It's a Kraken. It's a Kraken. You feel free to go look it up in the monster manual. It's a Kraken. They're not, no. You would want to avoid that. But Hisugi wants the Sea Elf village moved. The Swahagin want the Sea Elf village move. They don't want sea elves anywhere near Hale. And Acacius isn't going to move this village unless more sea elves are saved from the slave farm. So our players have to sneak into Krakn territory, steal a few slaves, and bring them back to Acacius just to appease him. So, before the characters leave, for like at least 2 months, they go back to Hale to take care of a couple things. First of all, they want to alert the Ryuka and the Halean government about what's going on, what they've been up to, what they've learned. What's really interesting is Hisugi is not okay with the mission to go save sea elves. He sees them as an enemy army, and he thinks that helping them or assisting them in growing is a terrible idea, and he doesn't want the players to do it, or the characters to do it. He also says that there's a chance to massacre them in any way, do it, because it's taking out an enemy army. Now, Hisugi isn't evil, he's neutral. He's also a leader of a lot of things. And so an enemy army is dangerous, and this is his approach to it. A dragon's reasoning is kind of how we put it. So, our characters follow up with Hisugi and learn that they really shouldn't help the sea elves. But there is one last thing they need to do. This is another thing that I didn't bring up on now because I wanted it to all kind of coalesce into one chunk of the story. They need to go to Rionthus, the city of Sinasarkids. And I'll tell you why. Do you remember Orwell, who's been sleeping and lazing about like an old man? He woke up and did a lot of talking back at the Sea Elf shanty town. He woke up, marched in to see the old man cleric, and demand to know how they prolong the life of the Sinasarkid. Well, why would the human cleric know that, and why would Orwell ask him? Well, because the Sea Elves didn't just visit the merfolk, the Sea Elves visited the Sinasarkids and asked a bunch of questions about coral care, which Orwell overheard, misheard, and thought that they were keeping some secret way to prolong his life and stave off death. So he didn't tag along to help, he tagged along for selfish reasons, but it's perfect. That's his character, and the conflict is fantastic. So our character's like, we're going back to your home, and we're gonna ask these Sinasarkids what the conversation was the Sea Elves had with them that you misheard. So Grumpy Orwell is taken back to Hale, and they're going to Rionthus. Now I'm going to describe a little bit more about Rionthus and the Sinasarkids. Rionthus is a colorful, interesting city. Its reefs twist and turn, and they have skinny, deep caverns that are lined with beautiful, colorful corals. The people themselves are beautiful, colorful corals. Some of them are soft, and their skin waves in the currents, and some of them are hard corals like Orwell, very stiff, and they walk around like big golems made out of coral. But they'll come in all shapes and sizes and all kinds of colors. We can go more into this custom-raised Sinasarkids in another video, but for the most part, what you need to know is that this new generation, this new colony, they care about doing jobs that help the community, that benefit their race, because a Sinasarkid colony hasn't really been put together before. They're usually dispersed, like a Cicalia is. But, so these Sinasarkids, they have doctors. They have a few NPCs that specifically take care of the villagers and their health needs. So the Sea Elves turned up and went to ask some questions. Now, our wonderful Sinasarkids actually did try to obey the law. They tried to insist that the Sea Elves leave. They are not allowed in Hale. But the doctors still wanted to hear their questions, see if they could help. Because if it means helping corals, you know, that's their interest, and they kind of couldn't help themselves. So, now we're going to do another. Remember this? Do you remember the big red branching coral with the necromantic slimes? Apparently they have a brood mother. They have a mother who, you know, releases polyps or gives birth the way corals do. And every time a living baby comes off of her, it goes through that slime and immediately is turned into her zombie. So the babies aren't living long enough to become their own corals, their own units. And the Sea Elves are wondering if there's any way to combat that. And there wasn't really an answer for that. They also were just asking how to keep her alive longer, this giant, beautiful, red, branching coral that is the mother of all the smaller ones. And again, there wasn't really any information. This is the part that Orwell overheard and thought that there was some kind of potion for prolonging life. As it turns out, Sinasarkids, as they start to die, they slow down, they sit still, they don't move a lot. because eventually the humanoid body on the inside will wither away and die, and the corals growing off the skin will continue just being a coral colony without the sentient being inside. So that's why Orwell's been very quiet and very sleepy and just not really been there. But he kind of was woken up by the need to talk to the human cleric. He hasn't really fallen asleep yet. And that's because we now have a player actually playing Orwell. Orwell's no longer an NPC. We had another player join us to play Orwell. And so we could really hear his racist comments and his bickering, and it was fantastic. So we just did a lot of backtracking. Talked about Umberly and the Sea Elves. We talked about the Sarkans and the Red Branching Coral. Talked about how Hisugi is not happy with helping the Sea Elves. But ultimately, our party decided to go east. An entire month of travel. Just normal ocean laid out before them, no crazy enemies. I mean, the Aboleth and its sea spawn came through here, so most things were taken care of already. 1 month of travel. They reach this huge, road that goes past them. I say road, a path. It's a trail of mucus that fills the water. It's the purple water is just coming off of all the mucus that's laying and coating the terrain. This water is poisonous. It is toxic. This mucus was left by the Aboleth, circling the Krakn territory over and over and over and releasing this mucus, looking for corpses to turn into its undead army. So our characters have to use a preventative antidote to get through it. They actually solved this problem really well, so they went through it pretty easily. When they came out of the purple water, what they saw before them was this vast landscape of weaving and twisting and turning cliffs, and on these cliffs were massive, majestic shipwrecks from all the ships that the Kraken had destroyed. Many ships were ripped in half, masts thrown and strewn about. Our party, goes through some shipwrecks, fights a couple random monsters, but ultimately they need to get past the shipwrecks and the cliffs to what they see on the horizon, and it's a great big mountain that is the vent, spewing hot steam and bubbles up into the surface. Just a big roaring column that you can see from so far away, even underwater. That is where the Kraken rests. The Kraken rests in this warm vent. And our characters need to sneak through, appearing completely normal, as the Kraken can sense anything in the waters in its territory. So our characters sneak along, and coming out of the vent are these sulfur powder deposits, these sulfur powder rivers that flow down into the trenches around the vent. And our characters have to get down in that terrible water and those terrible rivers and those trenches to get in to the slave farm. The slave farm is a circular city that circles the vent that the Kraken is in. When our characters arrive, they're actually picked up right away by some informants, some people who work specifically to organize the escapes of slaves. These eccentric sea elves who help organize slave escapes, they've decided that helping slaves escape, it's futile. Everything's just going to keep happening over and over again. So ultimately, if anything is going to change, the Kraken needs to be killed. And our parties are our characters in this party are excuse me? A Kraken. The equivalent of a fast-acting plague, a massive bomb, a leveler of cities against 5 level 10 player characters. No! Our party turns and walks into the streets of the slave farm to try to find their own slaves who are willing to escape. Now that does not go as planned. This city has a lot of issues. I mean, it's a slave farm. It's a farm. These people are farmed to be eaten. And the slaves are required to meet birth quotas, creating enough bodies to grow up and feed the Kraken. They're also limited to a certain lifespan. After they reach a certain age, they get lined up for sacrifice to the Kraken. These people are damaged and fearful. At least they seem so on the west side of town where we start. It turns out that this slave farm developed into a city just like any other. It has a low and a middle and an upper class, with the upper class controlling many things. It's a very valuable currency here. You can pay the poor to increase their birth quota to give birth more than the rich do. and then the rich have an easier life. Then there's the other thing where, let's say you reach 500 years of age and you have the amount of money to pay someone else to die for you. Their family can live well and you can keep living longer. So the poor are being kept poor by the rich in the city. And through very, very dark means. So when our heroes try to find slaves who are willing to escape the poor parts of the city, no one is willing, because that means you're leaving your family to take your birth quota, to take your punishments. It's not good. So they cause a ruckus. The officials are called, and our heroes are taken to a prison. The good thing is, I mean, you can call it good. The prison guards they've got the rich families paying them to do whatever they want. So when nightfall comes, our prisoners, our heroes, are taken to this very beautiful, huge estate of one of the leading families of the city. And they're chained to a wall at a party to be entertainment. And this is all just to hide the fact that the I guess you'd say the head of this rich family wants to speak to these 5 races about some business dealings. So when the party dies down, our heroes are approached by the leader of this rich family, and what he requests of them is to take some sea elves out of town who have paid him a great deal to have this done for them. So instead of taking people who deserve it, he's taking rich people who had the means to leave. And then he says, well, I actually don't care if you leave with them or not. You can kill them for all I care, because I'll have their money and they'll be gone and everyone will think that the transaction went through. This did not sit well with one of the party members. Yisk, our blood hunter, followed the old man into his bedroom and slit his throat and got caught right away. So this causes a bunch of havoc on the east side of town. Our characters have to book it out of there. And luckily enough, the son of this family, one of the youngest sons who despised his father, who had a secret marriage and secret children, he would like his family taken with the party out. So now the party has their slaves that they're rescuing for Acacias, but there's chaos, and that chaos is attracting the Kraken. So they get out of the estate, they get out of the east side, but they're still in the Kraken's territory where he can sense anything. The Kraken decides to reveal himself. Decides to come out of his lair and speak to the party. This should have been a total party kill. I think other DMs would have done that. I decided not to because I already had decided that this Kraken was fat and spoiled. He's still highly intelligent, but he's fat and spoiled. He sees the party members heading to the east. He knows that there's land to the east, and he knows that there's ships to the east. He's hoping that these characters, trying to avoid the Kraken, will get a ship, ride the ship over his territory, and he'll just take the ship down to eat them and all their crew members. He thinks it's in his best interest to let them live so they can invest time in getting more people for him to eat. So the Kraken does let them go. And that's something I would have done if the Kraken had found them on the west side of the territory too. He wants, ultimately, instead of eating 5 people, why not eat 30? However, to show his control over his slave farm and to show what he can do to these players who dare trespass, he massacred, oh gosh, maybe hundreds, I mean at least tens, at least 100. He massacres a bunch of slaves and eats them right in that moment as our players are fleeing their backs to the blood in the water. So I'm sorry to make it so dark, but it was a Kraken and they did draw his attention. What's really fascinating about all this is we didn't actually realize this until way later. So, Yisk worships Hisugi, and Hisugi wanted the Sea Elves massacred. That means less of a force that could kill the Suhagin or could march on Hali. We had all totally forgotten about that. We had totally forgotten about Hisugi's wishes. But Yisk worships Hisugi. And we actually think that Ben, our player, We think that he remembered that, and we think he had caused this massacre on purpose to please Hisugi. It's really unfortunate that we can't ask Ben if that's what he did, but he was so highly intelligent that we really do think he was just totally tricking all of us. It went totally over our heads. It's just amazing to think about. He was thinking about it that deeply. He was in his character so deeply that he didn't even tell us when he was out of character that that's what his motives were. And that's how he was. And so that's what we think happened. I'm actually really, really impressed at that ability to stay in character. It's just highly impressive. So, our characters go to the east side of the Krakn territory, which actually does touch land. And this is where our underwater campaign breaks the surface, walks onto the sandy beach, and goes on land. And that's why we actually had everyone pick races that could breathe air and walk on land. Now we have the ability to explore a whole nother terrain, a lot more monsters, a lot more towns. And that's the end. That's as far as our players got on the Sea Elf quest line. They got their Sea Elves that they need to return to Cassius, but they can't return to Cassius or the Krakn territory or they'll be killed. So they're going to need to find another way over to get them. But they already have made it to land on the east side, so now it's time to look for the Bronze Dragon. It's time to go into the next quest. The next quest, I'm actually going to talk about how far our players got. It was only 3 episodes, so I'm actually going to do it at the beginning of the first epilogue episode. So there's going to be a little bit of recap left in the beginning of the first episode of the epilogue. Of course, if you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments and I'll try to clear things up. I want to thank you for watching. I know this video is twice as long as the last one, but it was kind of all, it all flowed together. The whole going to see the Kraken, going through the Krakn territory. So, thank you for joining us on Downstairs and Dragons. Thanks for watching the recap. Thanks again to our amazing players for making this amazing production. I'm very excited to share with all of you the end of the story, but, you know, keep in mind there's going to be spoilers, and keep in mind these recaps have spoilers too, so hopefully you're okay with that. Make sure to go check out the episodes for all the funny moments that I didn't get to mention. Make sure you show us your support and ask any questions you want. Tell us what kind of things you're interested in, what you think we're doing right, what are your favorite moments of each episode. Anything that you can tell us to help us get better would be great. But we're just so happy to be playing D&D again and playing with each other. So we will see you next time downstairs.